I agree, Sky Guardian. You mentioned reading another section from the Vachanāmrut. Let us do so. This is a selection of about 300 or so discourses from a great being known as Swami Narayan, among many epithets. In this book, he is often addressed as Shriji Maharaj. We will be reading Gadhadā 1:23. Emptying a pot of water, remaining in an elevated spiritual state. On Posh Sudhi the 5th, Samvat 1876, otherwise known as the 21st of December 1819, Shriji Maharaj was sitting on a large, decorated cot on the veranda outside the east-facing rooms of Dada Kachar's Darbar in Gadhadā. He had tied a white feto around his head and was wearing a white angarku and a white surval. He had also tied a deep orange shailu around his waist. At that time, Paramahansas, as well as devotees from various places, had gathered before him. Out of compassion, Shriji Maharaj then began to speak to the Paramahansas. The Vasudeva Mahatmya scripture is extensively dear to me because it describes all of the methods of how devotees of that source, God, should worship him. Shriji Maharaj then continued, there are two types of devotees of that source, God. One has complete conviction to God, yet worships God identifying themselves with their body. The other, however, believes their own self to be Chaitanya, awareness, consciousness itself. Transcending the influences of the three states, waking, dream, and deep sleep, and the three bodies, Sthul, Sukshma, and Karan, this devotee worships God while beholding God's form within their very own self. As a result, they see their own self, which transcends the three states and the three bodies, as being extremely full of light. Within that light, they see the form of God just as it is, in its incarnate form, as being extremely luminous. Such is the elevated state of the latter devotee. As long as one has not attained this elevated spiritual state, one is subject to obstacles, even if one is a devotee of God. Shivaji, for example, did not behave in such an elevated spiritual state, and was therefore enticed by the beauty of Mohini. Brahma, the creator, and by the way, Shiva is the destroyer, Brahma also did not behave in such a state, and thus became infatuated on seeing Saraswati. Naradji, who was a Deva Rishi, a guru of even the celestial deities, also did not behave in such an elevated spiritual state, and consequently harbored a desire to marry. Moreover, because Indra, Chandra, and others were not behaving in such a state, their reputations were also blemished due to their mistakes. Furthermore, if a person has not developed this elevated spiritual state, they will perceive worldly attributes even in God, even if they themselves are a devotee of God. King Parikshit, for example, was not such a devotee, and so he raised doubts about the divinity of Sri Krishna Bhagavan. After hearing of the Ras episode, on the other hand, because Shukji was such an elevated devotee, he had no doubts whatsoever. Such a devotee firmly realizes, if no flaws can affect me or bind me in any way, how can there possibly be any mayic flaws in God, by whose worship I have become like this? Such a devotee firmly realizes this. When such a devotee of God focuses their vritti, concentration, on the form of God, that vritti is divided into two. Of these, one vritti focuses on the form of God, while the other focuses within the worshipper themselves. The vritti that is fixed on God's form is applied lovingly, whereas the vritti that is fixed on the worshipper themselves is full of contemplation. This latter vritti negates all other thoughts and desires, except those of worshipping God, that may arise in the worshipper. It also negates all of the flaws within the worshipper themselves. In this matter, the vritti of such devotee constantly remains on God. A person who at times worships God with a concentrated mind and at other times indulges in worldly thoughts does not develop such an elevated spiritual state. Consider, for example, a pot that is filled with water and emptied somewhere. If another pot of water is subsequently emptied at the same place on the following day, or the day after that, a pool of water will not collect there. Why? Because the water poured on the first day dries up on that very day, and the water poured on the second day also dries up on that same day. On the other hand, if a trickle of water were to flow continuously, a large pool of water would soon be formed. Therefore, while eating, drinking, walking, engaging in any activity whatsoever, whether it be pure or impure, in fact, at all times, one should constantly keep one vritti on God. While remaining one's vritti constantly on God, while maintaining one's vritti constantly on God, in this manner, one attains that abiding, elevated spiritual state. And so we conclude Gadhadā 123 on emptying a pot of water and remaining in such an elevated spiritual state. I very much enjoyed the analogy of water pooling with a continuous stream. Otherwise, if you pour one pot of water one day, then the next day it will have already dried up. Therefore, one should constantly engage in bringing one's mind to that source, so as to accumulate the waters of divinity within. But thank you for listening together. And Noor, you summarize. Basically, always keep your Creator in mind. Tadastu. Lana, you say that I give you all so much energy, it's too much for the internet connection. Perhaps,